Okay, we're gonna get started. So, while an introduction is not necessary, it's my pleasure to introduce Dane Young, a good friend, colleague of mine. We're part of a lot of the same community programs, and Dane will be presenting on automation framework, Windows image creation on Microsoft Azure for Citrix and AVD. Dane, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear this okay? All right, I know I don't need a projector or theater type of speaker for you all to hear me. Anyone that does know me know that I talk a lot, and I talk about all kinds of interesting topics, some of which are useful, some of which probably not so much. Today's session, as Stephen mentioned, we're going to be talking about automation, so I'm really excited to share that with you. I was specifically asked not to have company bio type of information in here, but I am self-employed. You all can find my profile and all kinds of information about me online, most of which is good information. There is some stuff on there that's not so good information online, but I do blog, and I'm part of these key communities that have really shaped the EUC industry, and I'm very thankful for my participation in them. A little bit about me. I'm a family guy. I love being outdoors. I love hanging out with my 4 wonderful kids, my daughter and 3 boys. And being outdoors is where I like to spend the most time with them, whether that's on some kind of athletic adventure or camping or hanging out at our family's cabin. I'm always outdoors and always enjoying getting grounded in nature, which helps me to do all these things with technology in a much more effective and efficient manner. A little bit about my EUC journey. I don't go back as far as Brian Madden. Some of you can probably figure that out. And I don't go back as far as some of you, to be completely fair. But I've worked in a lot of sizable EUC environments across primarily 3 technologies, being Citrix, Microsoft, what was formerly VMware EUC, which is now Omnissa. And with that, I bring a lot of breadth and depth on the technology landscape as far as what these common industries are doing with their EUC technologies, primarily VDI, but there's been a long-standing history of app delivery, hosted shared desktops, and the like. So if you're in the wrong spot, now would be the time to find the other room that you actually wanted to go to. But this is the session description that I submitted, and the team at World of EUC had accepted for this session. And you can see it's quite robust because I got a lot to talk about here, and there's a lot of content that we'll go through as part of this session. So if this is not the session that you wanted to attend, this is the description, and you can say, hey, I'm not interested in any of that, and we'll go to drinks and have a good time later anyways. But there's a couple things that we're going to cover as part of this that, you know, this session description basically makes my agenda that we're going to kind of walk you all through as it relates to this automation framework. A little bit of an intro. This is something that I've been working on for a period of time. It was more or less accelerated in the last year or so with a big project that I was on that was primarily focused on Citrix on Azure, but been using variations of this technology set for many years, whether that's in on-premises environments, home labs, customer dev test type of environments, customer production environments. Been using this framework for a number of years. And today have successfully tested it. It's functional and delivers images for Citrix and AVD. Azure Virtual Desktop is the title in first. What I'm working on next is actually taking the same framework to my own environment around Horizon Cloud on Microsoft Azure, and using the same framework, the same automations process to build master images for Horizon Cloud on Azure. Now, there's going to be some things that are different there. Obviously, the way that App Volumes works is different than the way that Citrix and Microsoft deliver applications into these images. So we're going to have some interesting nuances there for App Volumes. But generally speaking, this is a framework that can be made portable between different environments. And in the parentheses, the brackets, you see it's focused on Azure. That's what today's conversation is on, but the same framework is utilized in on-premises environments as well. So leading up to this session, I like doing things online. I love my online community. To be honest, from 2020 with COVID until now, the Twitter dump has kind of affected my ability to interact with people online, but I'm still very active on LinkedIn. And so what I did leading up to this session is I put together a teaser video that kind of walks through some of the elements that we're going to be covering in the session and put that out on social media, primarily LinkedIn, and got some good interactions on that. But what this teaser video is intended to do is showcase just a little sliver of the technical content that we're going to go into in this session, and hopefully it's beneficial for you all to see, like, where's the preview of where we're going. So in this particular video, as you can see, we have a WPF form. That's a framework that Microsoft has for developing UIs with PowerShell. And that WPF form gives you a selector of different options that you can pick from. And then when you hit the submit button, it takes those options that you selected and then it dumps it into the automation that's going to then go and do all of the things that we're going to cover in this session. So that's the quick teaser video so you know where we're going with the session. And another teaser that I gave was from my 4K monitor showing all kinds of automation windows just to show how geeky we can be. As Brian kind of alluded, we kind of live by our desktop workspace and all these awesome things that we can show off. And so having everything in like one screenshot was like, yeah, this is it, this is great. So basically what you're seeing in this particular screenshot is that selector UI, which is the WPF, the framework that Microsoft produces to build a UI through PowerShell. And then based on the selections, it spits out individual PowerShell processes that then perform all of the automation that's behind it. So why would this be useful? Well, because Patch Tuesday happens every Tuesday, and multiple times a month, you're going to have to go through this process of either updating your master image or, in this case, rebuilding master images that are automated and consistent in their form and factor. So what we have here for the selector is a process where you would take multiple images. In the selector, you can see an example of a healthcare style customer that has some healthcare style images that would have different applications and configurations and security profiles and all that in it. And you would use that to then build your automated VMs that then go out and spin out all of the different variations of that base image that you have. So if we went to inspect just one of these, for example, and we were to see, okay, what kind of output do we get when it's actually executing the function, we output a whole bunch of variables that are then sent to the PowerShell module to then go perform all of those functions against Azure to build the VMs and do all of the things. So you can see some of the variables that are in here. There's nothing that is sensitive. You know, I'm not going to put plain text passwords and stuff in here, but you can see how we're actually doing certain functions within the PowerShell module to actually go and grab passwords and credentials out of, in this case, an Azure Key Vault. You could use any kind of password keeper that you particularly have, as long as it has an API. Go grab and fetch the credentials, and then inject them as part of the script to go and perform the build functions. So it's all PowerShell driven, and I went through a lot of work over the years to ensure, as much as I can, use PowerShell 7 and above, so that there's no legacy code with older versions of PowerShell. There are some modules that are still older version dependent, such as MDT, for example. If some of you have used MDT, you probably know that it doesn't have the most robust or sophisticated PowerShell capabilities, but we use that part of it very minimally overall. So what that does, once we're done with the selector and we've picked all of our images and we've said, okay, let's go ahead and spit out new versions of all these images so that then we can go update our catalogs, update our, in this case, AVD pools, and go through that motion, it's going to run a whole set of operations against those images that are created. And the automation framework that I decided to go with for this particular framework is MDT. So If you've used Microsoft Deployment Toolkit before, you probably recognize that little progress bar there. It's a very common approach. Now, one of the things that I wanted to do for this framework is not have any software requirements for purchase this, purchase that, buy this license, use this code. And there's a lot of automation tools that are out there, but I wanted something that was actually portable that I could take from different customer environments, build frameworks that were completely free and not costing anything in addition to the licenses that we're going to utilize. So if we look here, what you can see is a console session using RDC Manager, and that RDC Manager is going to connect to the virtual desktops and then show you the progress as it's going through the process. And RDC Manager, as well as MDT, is a free solution, and I built some extra hooks in RDC to actually make it useful when you're spinning up a lot of VMs and you need to have those connections dynamically created.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Are you open to questions from the audience?
I am open at any time throughout the presentation for questions from the audience, and so you do not have to save them until the end. Yes, sir.
Isn't MDT no longer supported on Windows 11? Like, isn't that deprecated?
It's a good question. I did indicate that this was a stump the chump opportunity, so that's one that I'm going to follow up on, and when we go to drinks later tonight, I'm going to go back and get you an answer on that. So his question was, isn't MDT no longer supported in Windows 11? Isn't it deprecated? And I don't know the official Microsoft stance. I know it works, and I know it's worked for years, but I don't know if they're actually moving away from it, if they're moving to other solutions in place of MDT. But if that is something that I have to move to as part of the framework, I'll find it an equal or like product to do. The one reason why I like MDT, and same with RDC Manager, is free. So we like free around here. The other reason I like it is because it's drag and drop and it's UI driven. Which if you're trying to hand something over to somebody else to manage after you've been deploying the solution, which is often how we find ourselves, we have to hand over all of the frameworks and things that we built to get the images the way that we want them to someone that doesn't have our same level of expertise, that needs GUI-driven, drag and drop, easy methods to actually manipulate their images, and MDT does actually a pretty good job of that. So, who's ready for a demo? You guys ready for like a demo-heavy session? Because this is a demo-heavy session. So we're going to do it live. I'm like Bill O'Reilly, do it live.
When you do your demos, you don't have a demo jacket?
I don't have a demo jacket. I don't have like a billion like devices and stuff that I can pull out, but I do have some really cool code and some automation that will hopefully work flawlessly the first time. Can everybody see the screen okay? I have my resolution as high as possible because I like having lots of screen real estate. He wants it zoomed. Yes, sir. I'll be happy to zoom it for you, Joe. Thank you very much for the reminder. I'm doing it this way. There's many different ways to do it. I'm going with the one that I'm comfortable with. So, there we go. Okay. And let's go back to that selector.
Oh, wow.
Is that good, Joe? Does it need Joe's approval? 2 thumbs up?
You can't see the whole screen.
No, that's right. That's right. You can't have it both ways, Joe. You can't.
Go out.
Oh, you want to do like the little, like narrow in on this thing. Okay. I'll get you next time. I'll make sure that that's in the feature enhancements request, and we'll put that one in.
I can change
So, as I mentioned, I have this staged and set up for this demo purpose to be like a healthcare-oriented type of deployment. Insert your organization, insert your industry information here, and kind of follow along with us. This particular deployment example that I'm showing is exclusively Windows 11. It's Azure-based, so as you can probably infer, we've got single session and multi-session. We've got the flavors of both. If you were doing this on-prem, you could have Server OS, you could have Client OS, you could have Windows 10, although you all need to be moving off of that in a hurry and get on Windows 11. But you basically have this framework so that your group is at the top, and then if you had multiple groups, whether it's Windows 10 images, Windows 11 images, Windows Server images, you could group them in this WPF framework. And then if you were to go ahead and click on some of these options, for example, what you would be able to do is then customize the image VM name. So the reason why this is useful is sometimes you're actually deploying multiple VMs and then doing like an AVD type of scenario where you want to test code on some of them but leave the existing ones behind. You have the ability to change the VM name so that as those new VMs are being established, it's automatically created with those names. Now, all of this information comes basically in the header of the PowerShell script, and so you could configure it your first time to say, here's the predictable images that I'm going to have, and always use this VM name to tie to this image type. So in this particular example, we have a standard image for multi-session, a standard image for single session, and the way I'm distinguishing between those in the VM name is either an A for AVD or an E for enterprise. So that's the way that I distinguish in the VM name. So if we were to go ahead and click the button, the big magical button, and watch the demo gods smile down on us, very kindly, of course, because you guys are all being very polite, not stumping me with any questions other than, is MDT deprecated? That's a pretty good one. So what we're going to see is PowerShell processes kicked off for each of these VMs that are then being spit out based on that selector and the criteria that we put into the selector. So if we were curious and we wanted to actually see the motion in progress, we could go up to our Azure portal, we could see the VMs as they're going through the process. And in this particular case, I actually already have 3 VMs with those same names deployed with disks attached to them. And so it's detecting, hey, there's already a VM there that has that name. I'm going to delete it. And once it's deleted, I'm going to deploy a new VM in its place. That's all part of the logic that we built into this. So if a duplicate is found, it's going to delete the VM, it's going to delete the disk. It could take a couple minutes, so we're going to come back to this guy. This is like the cooking show, right?
That's where the patience as a service comes in.
Yeah, patience as a service is a good one because most IT professionals don't actually have it. So what are we doing with the framework? We're building an option for us to have a selector that then does multiple different types of images based on criteria that we define as part of our design process. When we're going through this process, we have to think ahead. You can't engineer something if you don't know what the outcome is going to be, so you have to think ahead, and this is typically where we look at existing environments, whether those are manual builds or existing production environments with images that have been hanging around for much longer than they should have. And we build a framework around what the existing environment looks like. Now, if this was greenfield and we're deploying everything brand new, it's pretty easy to start with a vanilla image and then start customizing it for each of those different variations in your use case. So when we think about what types of things enable us to do this type of automation, the thing that comes to my mind is Agile methodology. And some of you have organizations that have adopted Agile. Some of you have all kinds of robust tooling around things like Azure DevOps, for example, or other ADO tools like Jira or others. And so the concept with Agile is that we're not going to take 9 months to go through a waterfall methodology where we're spending months doing design, and then we're going to spend months doing implementation, and then we're going to spend months doing optimization, and then we're going to have the final handover to operations at the end. Our images would have been stale by the time we got through that waterfall process. So what we're doing instead is we're operating in sprints, and that condenses the time frame that we have to actually get things out the door. And we're managing these processes with the Scrum Master that actually is kind of taking those requests and flowing them into our process. So the first iteration of the image might be pretty basic. It might just be like a vanilla Windows image with Office, and then you start adding additional capabilities into those images as part of this methodology. The concept that we're going for is a framework. It's not intended to be like a one-size-fits-all, everybody's going to look the same and everybody's going to go down this path. If that was the case, you could just build a product, put it on a website, start selling it for thousands of dollars a seat, and you'd be off and running. That's not what we're doing here. We're building a framework that from that framework can be adapted to customer environments, to different industries, different requirements that you have from an image standpoint. Here are some of those components that we have as part of the framework. And again, conceptually, the premise is we want to do things that are free. We don't want to have to introduce a cost of a component or a software suite that does automation capabilities if the customer doesn't already have it. Can they tie this into something else? Yes, absolutely. If a customer has a CI/CD pipeline and they have a whole bunch of automation tools that they're using as part of other application automation, you can tie this into that. And in fact, if we look back at that demo that we did, one of the things that I wanted to do as part of the framework is actually give the command by itself. Sorry, Joe, let me zoom in on that. The command by itself as part of the output. So if I didn't want to use the selector in the future, if I didn't want to use the GUI to actually pick the image, I've got all of the variables passed to the command that I can then copy and put into a pipeline and say, build me the image now, and just run it. And that you can do on a repeated basis without actually having to use the selector in the UI process to spit out that code in the first place. So that's one of the things that I've done a lot with testing is made sure that if I'm having to rebuild an image 3, 4, 5 times in the same day, because I'm testing different iterations of code within that image, I've got the single command that I can just hit, go, and not have to go through the selector process. The selector is great because it enables you to do many images from one UI and say, take it all the way down, and then kick them off. Okay? So what are we using as part of this? Well, Azure, as you might know, has a marketplace, and they have SKUs with images that are uploaded and maintained by Microsoft, and those are a part of overall framework that they have called ARM templates, Azure Resource Manager templates, to be specific. And so we can use those templates that Microsoft manages, and then our patch process is actually much quicker because we're not downloading 9 months of patches into that image. We're using the evergreen approach that Microsoft has through the ARM process. So we're using ARM templates, we're spinning up a VM off of an existing image in the SKU, in the gallery, and then we're using MDT to do all of our customizations, whether that's running PowerShell scripts, installing components. All of those processes are orchestrated through MDT, which all that has to do is actually get kicked off inside the VM, and then all of those automations go as a GUI-driven process, which makes it really easy to hand over to someone that's not as deep on all the automation stuff. We're using compute gallery, so I'll get into that in a little bit, but basically when we're all done with building this image, it has to go somewhere. So where do we put it? We put it in an Azure compute gallery, and then in the case of Citrix, we're using DAS in the catalogs that are inside of DAS to then say, update this image for this catalog based on this image compute snapshot that's in the compute gallery. So it's a very slick process. We use either DAS or AVD, or like I said, in the future, going to be looking at making this process available for Horizon Cloud on Azure. But we're using that for the catalog and pool creation process, assuming we're going to be doing predominantly non-persistent, whether it's multi-session or single session. We're going to go through that image update process using the tools that are built in there. Evergreen's going to get a nice shout out. My buddy Aaron Parker from Down Under. We'll talk about that in a minute, as well as Pester. So stay tuned. We got more coming on that. Conceptually, you guys have all seen these conceptual diagrams, topology diagrams that Citrix and others have put out. Basically, what this tells you is you got multiple components that are all working together to build a solution that, in this case, is DAS. And so as part of that, we're going to focus on the right-hand side, my left, your right. And the focus areas are going to be in this section here, which includes the cloud connectors and the management server and MDT server, and then mostly this section here, which is the images that are in the resource layer, as Citrix calls them, which are your multi-session, single-session, persistent desktop for developers, what have you. Who is enjoying PowerShell 7, by the way? So I'm a big fan. I've been a fan of PowerShell for a long time, but I think that Microsoft and the ecosystem has really leveled up the whole game from an automation standpoint with PowerShell 7. So I had a premise as part of this toolkit, as part of this framework, to do everything in PowerShell 7. And so what you're going to see is, whether it's a black console with green and blue or white lettering, everything's driven by PowerShell 7, which is PWSH, for those of you that aren't familiar. So when you're hitting the command prompt and you type PowerShell, don't do that anymore. Type PWSH. PWSH is going to launch PowerShell 7 if it's installed. If it's not installed, go grab it from GitHub, get it today. But we're going to use PowerShell 7 as our driving force throughout all of our scripts, executables, everything that's being run as part of that. So I'm going to come back to this screen right here. I'm checking on our cooking show, see how things are cooking along. Okay, we've got a couple of these that are done. And so we're going to just double check and make sure that they're connecting and doing magical things over here. Yep. All right, back at it. I just realized that I'm already 30 minutes into my session here, so I'm gonna have to pick up the pace. That's what always happens. You prepare a whole bunch of content and then you have to speed through it. So conceptually, what we're dealing with is a framework that's going to kick off a whole bunch of automation. So if you look across the top, I numbered them because I'm a paint by numbers kind of guy. I'm simple. Simple, simple, simple. So paint by numbers, we're going to start the VM script using PowerShell 7 with the required modules. We're going to select the images to deploy using a selector modal dialog window, which, as I mentioned earlier, is using WPF, which is a XAML GUI. And that framework gives us the selectors and the options that we have based on our header information in PowerShell. Then we're going to start the process to deploy the VMs based on the selection. The ARM templates are going to be utilized to create the initial VM based on the selected image definition. That ARM template uses JSON, and it joins the VM to the Active Directory domain. So we are automatically joining the domain and then kicking off the MDT sequence from a domain joined VM. The VM initiates the MDT task sequence based on the image definition. MDT task sequence installs applications and runs pester reports for post-install validation, and then it uploads the logs and results to an MDT server that we can then review and make sure everything's good before we do the final BISM and seal and commit and get everything actually pushed out to the catalogs. So you could automate this entire process. That's all part of the benefits of automation. You could take it from A to Z all the way through. In this particular framework, we're pausing after the image is prepped, so we can do a manual verification of all the reports and the UI elements, make sure everything is good before we actually build an image and then run into a QA issue because we pushed something that wasn't ready. Who's seen Evergreen before? Okay. Who's actively using Evergreen? Probably the same people that just raised their hand. If you've seen it, you use it. Basically, that's the premise with Evergreen. It's a colleague of mine. He's a CTP. He's actually the one that 12 plus years ago first got me thinking about automation for the images. He had a session at Synergy years back called Hands Off My Gold Image. The entire premise was that when admins leave organizations, they often leave all that tribal knowledge in their heads and not on paper of how was this image built that 500, 5,000, 50,000 users are depending on. It's all up here and is very rarely documented in either paper format or in an automation framework so that the next guy who comes in can actually rebuild those images on a regular routine, repeated process. So his concept was, hands off my gold image is to enable admins to actually hand over their images to other people that are not them, and allow those other people to then have a repeated process, which in this case we're using automation for that. So Evergreen is his latest invention, and it's a set of PowerShell modules that are available on GitHub. And basically what it enables you to do is search for a common set of software packages that are updated and usually available on the internet from common publishers like Adobe, and Microsoft, and the like, and then build automation, which is PowerShell. Obviously, PowerShell 7 is what I'm primarily talking about in this session, to download those packages on a routine basis so that your package that goes into the image is always the latest package that's available from that publisher. And so as you can see here, the pretty icons, they are the common applications that you would typically see in master images. Even when you're using things like app volumes or other app layering technologies like FlexApp, you're going to have some common apps that go in the image and then other apps that get added on top of that. So what we built is again, part of the framework is a set of folders that I call staging that have some scripts and other things that are already ready to go as part of that framework, and then use Evergreen to download the latest binaries. So instead of shipping around a 15 or 20 gig media zip file that then has all of this stuff built into it, all I have to do is ship around 20 megs or so scripts and other folders to stage the content, and then download all these apps through Evergreen as my starting point to then go forward with it. So in the top right, what you can see is a list of the folders that I have pre-staged that are all Evergreen applications, and those packages have scripts and other things to actually perform MDT installations based on those packages being downloaded with Evergreen. And so when we combine Evergreen with the PowerShell script that we build, we can then say every so often, whether it's every week, every month, every quarter, we're going to download the latest set of binaries available from each of these packages using Evergreen, and then we're going to dump them to the applications folder in MDT that then is referenced when we're calling the scripts to go and install those packages. So here's a set of them. You can see in the blue, it kind of highlights which applications are being covered here. So like Zoom and Zoom VDI, and then there's the Teams Bootstrapper, which probably everybody in this room hates that stupid Teams Bootstrapper because it never works consistently to attach your Apex packages. Anyways, that's a whole different session altogether. Right here is the staging folder that has all the scripts for performing installations of these different packages. All we need to do is combine that with the PowerShell script on the left to actually build our repository and get this thing going. So let's go check on our cooking show, see how things are going. Those two are getting stuck. They do not want to delete.
I think we got about 8 minutes or something.
Thank you, sir. Oh, looks like there's better process going there. Okay, so what you can see as part of the cooking show process is a number of VMs on, oh, why is this not showing up there? Every time I've been flipping out or flipping out of the presentation, has it been showing for you all?
For the most part.
It was? Okay. Holler if it doesn't, because for whatever reason it was keeping PowerPoint on the second screen. All right, so what we're doing here as part of this is on the bottom section are a number of VMs that have already made it all the way through that sequence process for their respective image types, whether those are clinical images or imaging, medical imaging images. They've already gone through the whole process. The three on the top are the VMs that are actually, as part of this session, kicking off and going through that process from scratch so that you can actually see it as it's kicking off the MDT sequence and doing all of those things. So right now it's running some Windows updates. Probably going to get stuck here for a little bit, but that's basically how that process is going. So what else do we need for the framework? So we have the ability to go and download all these binaries and put them into the MDT share. We've got some scripts that do silent installations of those applications based on the binaries that we go and grab from these websites. There are some applications, as everyone in this room knows, that are behind a paywall, so you can't just go and get automatic downloads of the latest version of Horizon Agent, the latest version of the CVAD ISO. You have to go download those components manually, but as part of the framework, what I'm doing is having an essential folder that you can drop those types of source files into, and then use PowerShell to unpack them, put them in the appropriate MDT folders, merge them with the scripts that are on a regular repeated basis. So instead of go grab this file, put it in this specific folder, you just drop it all to a central location, and then it'll parse those files that are typically behind a paywall, or you have to go and fetch manually. Reporting is important because we want to actually verify that the image is the way that we want the image to be before we go and push it out and affect hundreds or thousands of users. And so Matthias, who's also a CTP, has a wonderful GitHub repository for run software test. And what this basically does is it works with another tool that is very community supported like Evergreen called Pester, and it builds a UI so you can actually hand that over to reporters or directors or managers and say, here are all the verification steps of this image that we're about to push next Wednesday, so you can go and check to see if everything is green. So what you can see here, for example, is the UI element where an application failed to pass the test, that it was successfully deployed into the image. And so in this case, it's Jabber. Why anybody still use Jabber, I have no freaking clue. Talk about deprecated, this thing needs to go away. But this is an example where he's built a script that runs against the image that then checks to see if that Jabber executable is where it's expecting the Jabber executable to be. And if it's not, then it flags it and it's red. And now you've got a verification process that's built into this imaging effort so that you're not just pushing out updates without actually verifying that they're good. So what are we doing as part of the automation to then trigger other things? There's probably a better term for it, probably a more technical term for it. I call them breadcrumbs. What we basically want to do within the image is we want to tattoo some things in there so that we have something that we can go back and reference from within all of these different scripts and PowerShell modules that we're running to then do things based on the breadcrumbs that we found left behind. So one of the things that I leave as a breadcrumb is a reg key that has a parameter or a value that tells the VM and tells MDT that's referencing that VM as part of the automation, what image type is this particular VM. So as you might remember, the selector, we had all these different healthcare type of images. So if it's a clinical image, I put a tag on it that's CLN for clinical. If it's a medical imaging image, I put a tag on it that's IMG. And then within MDT and within PowerShell, I can go inspect that registry key inside of the VM and say, okay, this is a clinical image, now install the clinical apps. This is medical imaging image, go install medical imaging apps, right? So these breadcrumbs are useful because it gives us, with automation, the ability to go and parse that information and then do actions based on it. Yes, sir. 5 minutes?
Do you also include the date on there to know when the image was built? So you know if a machine didn't get refreshed?
It is possible. What we're doing as part of this framework is actually wiping all of the breadcrumbs that we're creating as part of the process. So I'm not leaving that behind. I'm using it throughout the automation to then trigger different things. But there are the registry keys or files that you could leave behind in the image to then do that reconnaissance work if you ever needed to. So in MDT, the way that we reference this is through options, which we can tag at either a folder level or on an application level to say, go and inspect this registry key, and then depending on that registry key value, do this thing, whatever that thing might be. So in this case, what you can see on the left-hand side is a set of folders for clinical image steps, billing and coding steps, medical imaging steps, general image, and each of those are looking at a particular registry key in the VM to say if it has this registry key with this value, then perform these sets of functions. So this is the way that we're tying all these things together, and when it works great. So I have a couple other demos that I can show afterwards, but I basically want to get through the final steps, which is, okay, great. We've got the image automatically built, customized, everything is in there based on the business unit that is going to serve out this image. What do we do next? Well, as you can probably imagine, we have to take that process to the final steps where we're using compute galleries to then upload the images into a central repository that we can use DAS or AVD to build pools and catalogs and actually deliver that final mile of the imaging process. So again, PowerShell 7 for the win. We're using PowerShell 7 to say, give me a list of my master images from Azure. Then I can use a selector and say this one, this one, this one. I've already verified the pester reports. I'm good to go. Those are ready to ship. Then using the selector, I'm uploading those to an Azure Compute Gallery. And then in that Azure Compute Gallery, I'm performing the DAS catalog update function, or in the case of AVD, update the pool. And then I'm using that to actually deliver those updated images using the process that we defined. So in summary, with just a minute to go, this works with Citrix and AVD today. It's going to work with Horizon and all the nuances that Horizon Cloud Service on Azure have going with it tomorrow. This session is focused on the Azure deployment automation, master image automation, AMIA, if you want to use an abbreviated term. And this framework works across on-prem environments as well. So depending on what your hypervisor is, you can build certain components that tie into this framework and then spit out images for on-prem hypervisors as well as other cloud providers. This was the session description, so if you forget anything that we talked about today and you're like, what was that tool, what was that thing that is actually utilized as part of this? It's on the World of the EUC website. Just go find my session, you can go see, oh, there's Evergreen, there's Pester, and so on. But if you take nothing else away, grab a screenshot of this one, because this has the key components that are part of the framework. This session is not intended to say, hey, use my stuff. It's intended to get inspiration out there so that we're all using this stuff, so we're all making the industry better. We should all be doing automation wherever we possibly can. And for those that aren't ready, don't have the skills in-house, and don't have the capabilities to actually build this framework from scratch, we do have engagements from a professional services standpoint where we'll come in and help bootstrap these types of environments for customers. It's not a shameless plug, it's just the reality of the business we're in is in consulting. I built a QR code, so if you do want to follow for updates, whether it's my blog posts or additional content, if I publish things to GitHub, I'll be posting that through this QR code. I'm not asking for your social security number, just name and email, and then you'll get updates as updates are available. I need to follow up on the MDT deprecation thing, but otherwise, are there any other stump to chump questions anyone wants to throw out?
What are you doing for credential vaulting?
Key vaults. So Azure Key Vaults have the credentials, both username and password, stored in secrets. And so the admin, the operator, has a set of privileges, IAM privileges, that allow them to retrieve those credentials and then push them into the automation as part of it. Yes?
Why did you save the admin creds in plain text in the registry?
What was that?
Why was the admin cred saved in plain text in the registry temporarily?
That's the breadcrumb.
But why?
Why? Because we use that breadcrumb to go attach to different things.
Like it's white plate.
Yeah, so one of the pester checks that we do is to see if the breadcrumb was actually deleted. And if it's not deleted, then it throws a red flag.
Unfortunately, if you're going to do any automated login, it's required.
Yep, whether it's auto admin login or even sysinternals auto logging can actually be reverse decrypted. So, any other questions? So obviously I'm very excited, very passionate about this particular topic as well as other topics that we get to engage with customers on. So if you want to grab a drink and chat with me at the bar, that's totally fine. Happy to talk about any of these concepts or technologies that we're using.
Cool. Thank you, Dane.
Thank you, sir.
We've got popcorn on the counter, and we have the meeting channel starting in about 3 or 4 minutes. And then shortly after that, we have a diverse panel. So